Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, and in today's video we are going to continue developing the chess app. In this video in particular, we are going to take a look at Unity's new input system, how we can use that to create our own inputs, action maps, and in turn create an input manager which is going to help us read in user inputs, and then we can use them to move about the chess pieces, which we will take a look at in the next video, not this one, because uh, it might take us a lot of time to converge both of these two concepts in a single video. So without wasting much time, let's get right into it. So this is where we last left off. And to actually use the new input system in Unity, we actually have to install it from the Unity package manager. So we go click on window and open the package manager window. And as you can see, I have the input system package installed already. But if you don't, you can just look for it over here in the search bar. If you can't find it, make sure that you're looking for all the packages in the Unity registry, not in just in your project or in the assets. So once you install the package, you might get a warning saying with an option of yes or no. What that warning is basically asking is that the current version of your Unity editor is using the old input system, and if you click on yes, it will shift to the new input system package that you have just installed, and it might need to restart Unity, and if you click on no, then nothing will change. So once you've done that, you can go ahead and close the window. And what I want you to do next is just create a new folder inside of your scripts folder, and I'm just going to call it inputs because I like to be nice and organized. And inside the inputs folder, we need to create a new input actions asset, and I'm just going to call this one as inputs. Okay, and now that we have this asset, we can go ahead and open it up. Now we can see a few different tabs in this window. First is the action maps and the actions. The action map is just Unity's way of giving you the option to create different maps for your inputs. So for example, if you are in an RPG game, then you might have one action map to control your player and all the battle mechanics and so on, and the other action map can be for your main menu or all the other UI elements in your game. So similarly, you can disable or enable the action map according to which scene you are on in your game. So this is a really good input system package. The old one was kind of messy and not really to my taste, but this one is quite good. Next thing you need to know is the tab over here for no control schemes. So basically you need a control scheme for an action map. What is a control scheme? It is a different device which you can use for your game. So it can either be the keyboard of your computer, it can be the touchscreen of your mobile phone, it can be an Xbox controller, a PS4 controller, PS5 controller, whatsoever. So for the purposes of this tutorial series, we mainly need the touchscreen control scheme. But since we are developing this in a computer, we might also need the computer control scheme to just for testing and debugging purposes. So I'm just going to click on this over here and add a control scheme. I'm going to call this computer, and I'm going to save this, and our main control scheme, I'm going to add it and I'm going to call it mobile, and I'm going to save that as well. And since we want our controls to be universal, meaning that they can be accessed through any control scheme, I'm going to click on all control schemes and and get myself a new action map. The action map, I'm going to just call it player controls, and that's that. Now we need, for this app in particular, we mainly just need two actions. One is the tap action, that is just touching your touch screen on your smartphone or your tablet or whatever, and one is for the precise location of the touch on your touch screen, so we can actually read the position you're touching to make sure the system knows which piece you're selecting or what you're actually doing where you're actually touching the screen. So I'm going to call this action as a tap, and I'm going to get myself one more action and I'm going to call it touch position. Now if we take a look at the tap action, we have a few properties. One is the type. It can either be a value, a button, or a pass through. A value is mainly for actions which need to read in a value from user input. So if we take a look at the touch position action, then we might want to use the value action type, because we need the value of the position you're touching the screen on. The button is just like a tap, it's either a true or a false value, and a pass through behaves similar to a value, but it has a few intricacies which make it different. We're not going to get into it right now, but for the purposes, we are going to use pass through for the touch position action and a button for the tap action. So I'm going to click on button, and for the touch position I'm going to choose pass through. Now we can start adding our actual bindings to these actions. Bindings are just different way to access these actions. For example, for the touch action, I can go to my mouse and click on the left button. So each time I press the left button, it's going to simulate a tap in the actions menu, and make sure that you have this checked for the control scheme. I'm going to add one more binding, and this is going to be in my touch screen. Then this is going to be touch 0. Make sure that this is touch 0 and not touch 1 or 2. And this is going to be a tap, and this is going to be in the mobile control scheme. Similarly, for the touch position, for the mouse, I'm just going, pardon me, this is actually going to be a pass through, and the control type is going to be a vector 2, because we need a 2D location in our screen. So the x coordinate and the y coordinate, so this is going to be a vector 2, and in the bindings this is going to be a position, and in the computer control scheme, and I'm going to add one more binding, and this is going to be again a position but in touch 0, and this is going to be in the mobile control scheme. So that is it for the input actions asset. We can save this asset and get rid of this window. And now the next thing I want you to do is generate a C# class, so that we actually have a C# script which we can access again, and in turn use it in our own input manager, so we can set up these controls. So I'm just going to click on apply, and now we see that we have this input actions C# class. If we go to VS Code and click on the input C# class, it is a dynamically generated C# script, so we don't have to dive too deep into it. You can take a look if you want, but I'm not going to. So we go back to the Unity editor and we create a new C# script, and this is going to be the input manager. Pardon the typo. Yeah, this is going to be the input manager which we are going to use for the remainder of this tutorial series. So if we go ahead and open the input manager right now, we can get rid of these 2 lines of code, and we are going to be using Unity engine dot input system, and we can get rid of these 2 lines of code over here. So this is going to be a singleton class. What I mean by a singleton class is it's going to behave like the static piece utility class, meaning that it can be accessed by all other classes. But because it is a singleton, there is only going to be one instance of this class and no other instance. To set that up, we need two members. First is going to be private input manager instance, and another is going to be a getter method for this instance, private input manager instance with a capital I, and this is actually going to be public, not private. And this can be, we need a getter for this, and if not instance is equal to new game object dot get component input manager, and then we can just return instance. So this is how we set up the singleton class for the input manager. And now we actually need a reference to the input asset C# class we have just created. So this is going to be a private inputs, and I'm just going to call it as action map because it's going to contain the action map. Next thing we created two actions in our actions asset, one for the tap and one for the touch control. The tap is going to be a boolean value because it can only be either true or false. That is, we are either tapping the touch screen or we are not. The touch position is going to be a vector 2 because it is a 2D position. That is, we have the x coordinate and the y coordinate. So we can set those up right now. So this is going to be a private bool tap, and this is going to be a private vector 2 touch position. So now we can set up the Unity start function, which is going to be a private void start. And inside the start function, we need a few things. One, we need to actually set up these two controls. We can do that by defining a setup controls function. And one more thing we might need is okay, so the action map asset is disabled by default. We actually need to enable it. So for that, we might want to create a function like on enable to actually enable these action assets. And one more thing which we need is to actually initialize the action map inputs we have just created. So this can be action map is equal to new inputs, and yeah, I think that is it. Okay, we also need one more thing in the update function. We actually want to reset these controls each time the frame changes so that there is no overlap or overhead. So private void, and we want to do this not in update but rather in late update, so that any logic which follows in update doesn't basically coincide with the logic we have in the update function for this class. So this can be reset inputs, and that is it. So now we can actually go ahead and set up these controls, or rather these functions. So private void setup controls, and in the setup controls function, this might seem like something bizarre and vague and might seem like a lot to take in, but just let me write down this line of code and I'll walk you through it one step at a time. Okay, so action map dot player controls dot tap plus equals context pardon me for the typo, context on tap context action map dot player controls dot touch position context on touch context. Okay, so we are getting an error. Let me just go ahead and fix that and I'll be right back. Okay, I am back, guys. I found out the issue I was facing. Actually, we have to make sure that I added this line of code. Okay, so now let's talk about the setup controls function. So we talked about the action map variable that we had created, which is the inputs asset generated by the C# class. we have the player controls um, control scheme, no, not the control scheme, the action map, and we have these two actions. So now, performed is just making sure that whatever code is going to run when these actions are called actually happens when they are being performed, not when the action is being exited or when it's being entered. So there are three checks. One is when the action starts to be get performed, when it is actually being performed, and one when the action is being exited. For example, if I'm pressing the left button on my mouse, when I start to press the button, there is one check. When I'm actually pressing the button, that is the performed part of the equation. And when I leave the button, there is one more check. So we are just making sure that whatever code is going to appear after when the action is being performed, it is actually happening when the action is being performed. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, just copy these lines of code. I promise it will work. Okay, now we have this context parameter which I'm passing in to these user defined functions on touch and on tap. These functions are just there to tell the computer what I want to happen when these two actions are actually being called. So we can go ahead and actually start writing out these functions. So private void on tap, and they have the input system asset actually has a parameter that we can pass into, which is the callback. Okay, my bad. Input action dot callback context, and I'm gonna call it as context. This is the parameter that the Unity function gives us to actually read in the user input. So when the on tap function is called, we just have to set tap is equal to true, and we can just copy this function over for the on touch function, on touch. And in this case, what we actually want to do is touch position is equal to read value my bad context dot read value, and the type of value we want to read in is a vector2. So that is it for these two functions. And next we can start fleshing out these two functions over here. So the first one is going to be reset inputs. So private void reset inputs, and the only thing we have to do here is make sure that, oh my bad, that tap is equal to false, and that is it. We don't actually have to change the touch position because there is no default value for a vector2 like false, and it can be any value, and changing the value doesn't actually matter, so we don't have to do that. And public void on enable, this will just make sure that we can enable the action map, and we might want a public function for disabling this too later on. So just for good practice, we are going to have a function for disabling the action map to action map dot disable. So that is going to be it for the input manager class. This video was kind of boring, but in the next video, now that we have our input manager set up, we can actually use this and directly start moving our pieces about so that we have player input in our chess game. So that is going to be it. Thanks for watching the video, guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one.